So there's a point in every feature where it's like appropriate to go like off the deep end into like erotic poetry. And erotic poetry is great because there's two types of erotic poetry. You got fantasy erotic poetry and reality erotic poetry. Fantasy erotic poetry is good. I mean, we're poets. Make ordinary shit sound great. So you understand the very premise of fantasy erotic poetry. We will embellish. Fantasy erotic poetry is dangerous. You'll meet somebody that will take you home like, okay, let's go. Yeah, none of the shit you said. So I don't write fantasy erotic poetry. I write reality erotic poetry. More of society can identify with this. A lot less hype to live up to. So this is my reality erotic poem that unfortunately more of society can identify with. So that's a long title for this. Shovelful by shovelful. Dirt jumped back off the shovel and piled high by the tombstone that marked my new home and my soul. Watched people stand in my grave's hole, and I found it odd when the preacher said, "Soul his rest God." People walked backwards, back towards their cars, and jumped in back first as that black hearse reversed and backed away until it reached the church on that sad, solemn Saturday. As raindrops jumped from the ground to the clouds, and the preacher said aloud, "Pray us let." And I could not forget the haste with which tears fled single file back up my mother's face, and my sister's look of hurt as she walked my mother backwards out the church, and I was back in that funeral home. Some unknown man had a tube in my hand, and I heard him say it's fluid embalming, and as it exited, my blood came back in. Suddenly I was once again in this hospital bed, and my heartbeat said, boo, 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 boo. I was alive again, and then the nurse backed in, and night turned into day 5 times in cyclical fashion, and that nurse kept asking, "Today you are how?" Every 4 hours I vomited up the 6 pills she made me devour in hopes that they killed what's causing me this pain. My room was filled with flowers, and day by day they became less as tests were conducted. Only after results were told to me. 5 days prior to my demise, my arrival was marked by ambulatory sirens, and I was in the back of that ambulance as it swiftly sped steadfastly back to the apartment in which I dwelled, and I saw scenes of hell as I was carried on that gurney back into the apartment and placed back on the floor as paramedics rushed backwards out the door, and moments before they responded quick, I regained consciousness and started feeling sick. All of a sudden I was healthy and well-he's is how my mother told the person on the phone I was doing, and with a hello the conversation had begun, and then she hung up the phone and then the phone rang. It took me back to the time 379 days ago when the phone rang and I answered it real slow. Prior to that slow hello, I took a breath in. Suddenly it was 2 weeks ago and I just took a blood test. The needle came slowly out my arm and I rolled my sleeve back down and I walked backwards around the exam chair and sat back in the waiting room with the carefree stare of reflection on how I could not possibly have an infection. I walked backwards out the doctor's office and sat back in the softness of my Maxima seats, and I drove the streets backwards through time to 6 months ago, and I arrived back on the doorstep of some girl I really didn't know. I walked back through her door and my clothes and her clothes both hit the floor, and I told her before this like sex had never I. Prior to our sexual action, our passionate attraction had us kissing, and I kept reminiscing back to the look in her eyes when she smiled, and I thought, cool. Then I remembered she said, that need, don't you. It was 2:15, and I saw my soul looking back at me, and I knew I was acting foolishly. You don't get second chances at bad romancing, and I begged my soul to let me go back to that moment in time when I was still a living, breathing man, when that unused condom jumped out the trash can and landed back in my hand.